Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So now that I've had a day to let this movie sink in, has my opinion changed on it at all? Not really. But there are some things I'd like to address a little bit more in depth, just so you can understand why I feel the way I do about this movie. So full spoiler warning is in effect for this video, obviously.
You have the luxury of not knowing what I know.
Still here? Okay. So once again, I want to reiterate that I am a huge fan of the Matrix trilogy that preceded this movie. I can't tell you the hours that I've spent watching theory videos and in-depth analysis on these movies. Because quite honestly, they deserve it. The Matrix, unlike other action blockbusters, do require the audience to think a little bit. I know that's a foreign concept to some, but that's what makes movies rewatchable in my opinion. It's more than just entertainment value. The question is, can I gain something from the movie every time I rewatch it?
That makes sense.
The Matrix Resurrection still has these high concept ideas contained within it, but they feel much more shallow this time around. Rather than let the audience figure out everything and come up with their own theories, it seems like at times in this movie, they are deliberately telling you what this movie is supposed to be about, either through lines of dialogue or something that happens. I saw a tweet coming from TV Guide of all places that said The Matrix Resurrections is a lot better than Revolutions. To which I would respond, this is why TV Guide doesn't exist anymore.
Fuck you!
This is just a theory of mine, but I think the approach that Lana Wachowski took with this movie was done to appeal to more modern audiences with shorter attention spans. But when you do that, it negatively impacts the philosophical story you are trying to tell. I've always thought that The Matrix was kind of too big for small minds in some aspects, and based on how this movie turned out, maybe Lana Wachowski agrees.
No shit.
Again, it's not all bad, and I actually kind of dug certain aspects of it, like the meta concept that has Neo being suppressed inside the Matrix. They've basically turned him into a game developer, and he made a game called The Matrix. So everything that happened to him in the previous movies is kind of disguised to him as just figments of his imagination. I thought that was actually a pretty clever concept. Plus, there's other programs and obstacles placed in his way to stop him from realizing who he is and what he is capable of.
Fuck me, right?
This idea that the machines basically resurrected him and Trinity after the events of Revolutions, simply because their power together has a lot of potential, that makes a lot of sense. Remember, the machines were basically using humans as a power source. One thing that I actually appreciated was that they didn't minimalize Neo's accomplishments in the previous movies. His sacrifice allowed humans in the real world to prosper after his death, because they formed a relationship with at least some of the machines that they were constantly fighting with. Neo allowed them to find common ground, and I think that was a nice concept as well.
Why do you cry?
Neo is basically on the edge of sanity throughout the entire first portion of this movie, because it's almost like there's this other side of him that's constantly trying to break out. The whole idea surrounding this movie is to keep both Neo and Trinity alive, but separate from each other, because if they are brought together, they become too powerful, but more on that in a minute. So Trinity is also being hidden from herself and others, but in true Matrix Destiny fashion, her and Neo eventually do meet face to face once again. And this kind of starts a chain reaction that would ultimately free both of their minds. Neo, because he is the closest to figuring everything out, is the first one to leave the Matrix and enter the real world. And he's freed by a new cast of characters led by their captain Bugs, and her ship full of mostly forgettable characters.
I knew it. I'm surrounded by assholes.
Also in the mix is a new version of Morpheus, who is a freed program, which is probably the most interesting thing in this new movie. Not Morpheus himself, but the idea that programs could now enter the real world. Again, this is the result of Neo's sacrifice, and it turns out that these programs are what helped humans prosper in the real world. The new Morpheus, however, is one of my biggest complaints about this movie, simply because he should have been called anything but Morpheus.
This is whack. I can't get jiggy with this shit.
Calling him that name and giving us this version of the character in this movie is very unfulfilling to a longtime Matrix fan. Morpheus was such an important part of the Matrix experience, and frankly, Lawrence Fishburne is irreplaceable. The same goes for Agent Smith. He's just too important to just put another person in that role and have it still be effective. When you do that, all the interactions that they have seem less important because they don't even have the same feel of the previous versions of those characters.
That is the sound of inevitability.
It really feels like Lana Wachowski underestimated the importance of her own characters and the actors who played them. Moving on, there are a lot of flashbacks to the original trilogy, which again lends itself to trying to appeal to a new audience. Die-hard fans like myself, however, have seen these movies countless times, and we just didn't need these reminders. It's literally a waste of screen time. And just showing me scenes from previous movies is kind of the lowest form of fan service.
That's right, it stinks!
Good fan service would have been having the real Morpheus and Agent Smith show up at some point, or possibly not rushing through the Neo and Trinity resurrection story. Their reintroduction to us and each other should have been a much bigger deal. The second half of this movie basically involves Neo wanting to rescue Trinity from the Matrix, and he's getting help from the rogue crew who is deciding to not follow orders. If all of this sounds very familiar, that's because it is. Again, we are covering a lot of familiar ground here.
Here I come. Oh, here I come.
The catch is that Trinity has to choose to leave the Matrix. She can't be forced out. And the Matrix has actually set her up with a pretty decent life. And I have to be honest, when she does eventually decide to leave the Matrix, the decision comes off very abrupt. Yet another example of them trying to cover too much ground in one movie and not letting the story breathe. Neo and the crew eventually have an altercation with the new Agent Smith and some exiles who want the previous version of the Matrix to be restored. The version where they, of course, had much more power. I gotta be honest, I kinda want the previous version of the Matrix restored as well.
Anybody care about what I want?
I do.
Shut up. Get out.
The Merovingian even makes a brief cameo here, but all of this really amounted to nothing. Another problem with this movie is it never really feels like there's any real stakes or consequences. And the whole plot of the movie involving rescuing Trinity is very predictable. Like very early on, you can pretty much guess how all of this is going to turn out by the end of the movie.
Whoopie fucking do.
Trinity, of course, does eventually snap out of her mental block and remember who she is and who Neo is. And then we have a plan being put into place where the crew is trying to free Trinity's mind while she's still inside of the Matrix, which is something that has never been done before. This was done, apparently, to take away the power of the concept of the red pill, because I guess Lana Wachowski isn't pleased with how the term red pill is being used in our society. But here's the problem. For people with memory and with common sense, the idea of the red pill being the symbol for people rebelling against the system can never be erased, as much as the creator would like it to.
You lose! Good day, sir!
And then we come to the most controversial part of the film, and apparently the reason that everyone seems to be calling it woke. This is why I don't really use that term anymore, because when you just slap it on anything, it kinda loses its meaning. The idea being presented in this movie is that Neo and Trinity together is what makes the concept of the One work. They are connected, they feed off each other, and they make each other stronger when they're in each other's presence. This is not far off from what happened in the original movie, where basically Trinity's love and her kiss brought Neo back to life, and she's basically responsible for the powers of the One awakening in him. So to say that the concept of them being together makes them more powerful doesn't make any sense. I would have to say that you aren't paying attention.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Now, Trinity is the one who unlocks the powers of the One in this movie first, yes. But they are both shown to have these powers at the end of the movie, so it's really inconsequential who gets them first. I remember way back when the original Matrix trilogy was being produced, I always saw theories about how Trinity could end up being the One instead of Neo. So if you're a Matrix fan, this concept shouldn't be too foreign to you. Now, the way that they presented this concept, again, yes, it was rushed, and it was very unfocused. So again, if anything, this falls on Lana Wachowski, who did not execute her ideas properly.
Put some effort into it!
At least not with the care and grace of the previous movies. Bottom line, this movie is not woke, it's just not very good. I do feel like The Matrix Resurrections is a missed opportunity. I do believe that there are interesting stories to tell in this universe, but this wasn't the way to go about it. It's disappointing as a Matrix fan to see a sequel that doesn't capture the tone or feeling of the previous movies. So let me know what you thought about all this in the comments down below. As always, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. Peace out.
Y'all be cool. Right on.